Defense Pete Hegseth is moving to purge transgender military people from U.S. military service. His move follows the Supreme Court's decision earlier this week, allowing the president's ban to proceed while legal challenges move through the courts. So far, about 1,000 service members have self-identified as transgender. That is out of 1.3 million active duty service members. Hegseth is giving them between 30 and 60 days to leave voluntarily or to be forced out. It is not clear, though, how the Pentagon might go about removing transgender service members from the military if they do not self-identify. Joining us now, host of the Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. Paul, what's this doing to morale?
Crushing it. Like everything else he's doing over there lately. I think it's another disruption. It impacts a relatively small number of people, less than 1%, but it's bad, it's reckless, I think it's bigoted, it's mean, and you have to actually, it's not just a ban, right, which would have been stopping people from going in, it's a purge, meaning removing people who are forward deployed, who are in units. So everybody you remove has a hole. It impacts that unit, it impacts that command, it impacts all the people around them, the families. So it's very, very disruptive, which has become the status quo for Hegseth.
Has there been any reporting that people, transgender people in the military haven't been able to do their jobs?
No.
Or that standards have been lowered for them?
No, and that's exactly why this is bigoted. It's unfair. It's un-American. Everybody should have an equal opportunity to serve and potentially die for their country. I think there's also another element here. He keeps doing this because it's a culture war, right? He wants these symbols. He's announced that they have till June 6th. Which is D-Day, whether that's, you know, some kind of spectacular culture war moment or they just want to be mean. But there's always a component here that kind of links it to American history in a way that politicizes even something like D-Day.
If you're not self-reporting that you're transgender, how are they going to purge you? Or does it become a version of don't ask, don't tell?
It probably does, yeah. I mean, or maybe they go around and start doing questionnaires, or they start asking people to report each other, which is also really damaging and it will destructively impact morale.
What is the difference between this and the former ban on gay people in the military?
Well, the ban would have stopped people from joining. This is, again, removing people who are right now in Syria, in the Middle East, on battleships around the world. So these are people who maybe have been serving for 20 years. These are fighter pilots. These are people in forward deployed units who are...
Just thinking functionally, how do you get about banning transgender people after it's already been ruled to not be okay to ban people who are gay? If you're talking about people fundamentally who they are, what's the difference?
They're going to have to explain that. I mean, their definition of trans, their definition of gay, their definition of sex is even different than what has generally been accepted around the rest of the world and definitely in westernized countries. So it just underscores the massive disruption. And Hegseth continues to execute not on our national security. We're not talking about Signalgate. We're not talking about NATO. We're not talking about recruiting. We're talking about banning a group of people that they don't want to stand with. And I think it's really going to rip apart the military just because of the disruption.
Tell me about what's happening right now at military universities, institutions, academies.
They're going to have to figure out how to implement this as well. They're going to have to change their acceptance standards. They're going to have to change potentially who's teaching.
This anti-woke push for the academies.
Well, the thing I keep saying, Katie, is everything they're doing at the Pentagon and the military is what they want to do for the rest of society. They're just doing it there first because, in part, it's easier to get the military to do what you want them to do. So they ban books. They're banning trans people. They're trying to attack DEI and remove books by Maya Angelou or anything else that they view unacceptable from the curriculum, from the academic institutions, as a way of cascading down to the rest of society. So watch the Pentagon space, not just because of national security, because it's the tip of the spear for the total transformation of society that they want to execute.
Does it hurt attendance? Does it hurt people who want to join the military or join an academy?
Yes. I mean, it just narrows...
Or does it change the type of person who wants to join?
It does both. Right? I mean, you're going to get more people who are anti-woke and love Fox News and think that Pete Hegseth is MacArthur. And you get other people who don't want to be a part of a military that becomes more narrow, becomes more male, becomes more right-wing, becomes more white. I mean, that is the army and the military that they're building. It doesn't look like the military of 2024. It looks like the military of 1864. And that's the real problem here, is they're dragging us backward to make it look like the army of the Confederacy, not a modern military that can fight around the world.
Since the first year of his first term in office, he has wanted a parade. And not just a normal parade, he wants a military parade. After Trump in his first term saw a military parade in France for Bastille Day, he said he wanted to top that. He said he wanted something bigger than that, something more like the gigantic Death Star military parades held by countries like China and Russia and North Korea. Specifically, Trump wanted tanks. He wanted tanks upon tanks rolling down the boulevards of Washington, D.C. The issue with tanks, though, is that they weigh a ton. To be more exact, American tanks weigh like 30 to 70 tons, more or less, depending on the model, which is way too heavy to roll down the streets of Washington, D.C. without destroying the streets of Washington, D.C. So in his first term, Donald Trump did not get his military parade with tanks. But he did get a consolation prize. Halfway through his first term, on the 4th of July in 2019, he held what he called a salute to America in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Basically, he gave a speech, a stationary speech, and he did have tanks, but they were not tanks rolling by. They were also stationary tanks. In fact, the closest thing to a parade that day was the convoy that was required to get the tanks into position, because the tanks had to be carried toward the memorial on semi-trucks and then carefully rolled off the trucks onto a series of strategically placed wooden planks where they put them on little platforms so they wouldn't break anything. That was it. Tanks on semi-trucks and then on little plinths. That was it. His whole first term, Trump never got the big military parade he wanted. Now, of course, he's trying again. The Army now says it is planning a military parade complete with more than 6,000 soldiers and, you guessed it, tanks. It is still unclear if those tanks will be rolling or stationary or on the back of semi-trucks, maybe. But the whole spectacle is set for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, which also happens to be the president's own birthday, June 14th. And if that news makes you want to be somewhere, anywhere else, take heart. Something else is happening that day. At more than 100 locations around the country thus far, I have a feeling there's going to be more than that. A coalition of groups, including Indivisible and Social Security Works and 5051, they are all organizing a nationwide day of protest for June 14th. They're calling it No King's Day. As they put it on their website, quote, Donald Trump wants tanks in the street and a made-for-TV display of dominance for his birthday, a spectacle meant to look like strength. But real power isn't staged in Washington. It rises up everywhere else. Joining us now is Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Ezra, it's nice to see you this evening. Thanks very much for making time.
Great to see you, Rachel.
So we've spent a lot of time covering sort of the character and the effect of protests of all kinds around the country. A lot of those organized through Indivisible, a lot of them organized through 5051 and other groups. What is the basic idea, the specific idea, I guess, around June 14th?
Look, Donald Trump wants to spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to throw himself a big fancy parade with tanks in the streets. And on one level, this is ridiculous, right? But he is doing this for a reason. This is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. He wants to project strength. He wants everybody to think that he is all powerful, that he rules the world. He doesn't. He doesn't. As we said on that website, look, real power is not in D.C. It's distributed all across the country. And what we're looking to do on No King's Day is to say, look, Donald Trump does not own the flag. He does not own patriotism. In fact, we can all show up in opposition to a king in this country. And this isn't about any individual organization. This is about all of us. Whether you are from the faith community, whether you're a veteran, whether you're an activist, whether you're a teacher, you can be part of this. As you mentioned, there are 100 events so far. This has been up for the weekend, available to register events. I would expect over 1,000. We saw 1,100 for May Day protests. We saw over 1,300 events all across the world for April 5th hands off. If you are watching this right now and you are thinking, well, I don't want a king in this country, good news, neither do we. And you can be part of this. Look up, see if you've got an event near you. If you don't, congratulations. You are going to be the organizer for an event in your community. We need them in rural communities. We need them in urban communities. We need them in red states and purple states and blue states. Ultimately, this comes down to all of us. We have got to do the work to show that, yes, this is a constitutional republic, and a constitutional republic has no kings.
Ezra, over the course of the first 100 days of Trump in office, I feel like what I saw as the effect of protests were sort of two things. First of all, because the protests weren't just one big protest one day in Washington or one big day in New York or something like that, but because the protests were constant and happening so frequently and happening in literally every state in the country, and I'd say over time in almost every town of any size, and some towns of no size. Because they happen in so many places, one of the effects was that a lot of Republican members of Congress and senators found themselves confronted by their own constituents about stuff that Trump was doing that they themselves, as elected Republicans, couldn't defend and couldn't explain, and felt like they had to ultimately say, OK, I side with my constituents on this. And that drove a lot of caving in Washington in terms of what Trump was trying to do. But then the other thing that I saw happen is that I think the large numbers of protests over time happening all over the place created a sort of culture in which it was shameful to capitulate. And the groups, whether they're law firms or billionaires or business interests or anybody else, or Republican electeds or anybody else, or even Democratic electeds who were thinking about sort of cozying up to Trump, looked at this footage and looked at what was going on in these communities and looked at these large protests and felt like, you know what those people are asking for is probably the right side of history, and I don't feel comfortable staying on the other side of that. I felt like it created a cultural dynamic in which it was embarrassing to be siding with Trump. That's what I've been seeing, just covering this stuff in order to tell people about the news over these past 100 days. I wanted to ask for your reaction to those observations and ask, as somebody who's been involved really right in the middle of this, if you feel like the impact has been something other than that.
Look, you are exactly right. What we are doing with
Donald continues to infuriate people who have served their country. And a lot of them have given up on the Republican Party. And again, a lot of veterans have given up. They've quit on this idea that they need to try to both sides everything. And a lot increasingly numbers of veterans groups, which for understandable reasons have been reluctant to fully wade into partisanship, right? Because the whole point is that if you've served your country, you served your country. You didn't serve a president or a congressman or a senator or a particular political party. Like the General Milley said when he retired, he said, in this country, we don't swear an oath to a party or a king or a president or a pope or a church pastor or a rabbi or whatever, right? We swear an oath to the Constitution, which is in a sense also swearing an oath to the people, like to the American people via their Constitution. And soldiers make when they serve, that's what they do as well. But Trump has made it so that to be loyal to the Constitution and the principles of it, you have to become a partisan opponent of Donald Trump and indeed the Republican Party. Because a lot of people want to leave the military. A lot of people, again, whether or not they've officially quit the military, they've quit on Trump. They've given up on him as being an effective commander-in-chief. But other people are being forced out. And Trump is now trying to use the military for his own fascistic purposes, but people won't let him.